The Crew Motorfest has a huge problem, and no, it's not Forza Horizon 5 going to PlayStation. Let's go! Alright, before we get into it, I just want to say I'm coming at this with pure intentions. I want everyone that plays Motorfest to have fun, whether you're a casual player, a hardcore player, competitive, sweaty, doesn't matter. I just want everyone to have fun racing, and my goal with this channel is to help people get faster and to maybe bring some community together. So with that said, let's get into the problem. The problem that Motorfest is having is that the crew community is fractured, and IVT and Ubisoft are seemingly making it worse. Not intentionally, but everything that happens with each of these updates seems to make this problem a little bit worse than it was before the updates. The cycle that we're in right now is that features or content or game modes get added every single update since launch that largely cater to a casual player. The hardcore community then complains about the experience being either worse or the same as before the update, and then the casual community responds with sort of a deal with it type attitude, and the player bases just get farther and farther apart. Now, before I get into like sort of these problems, I want to talk about a definition of hardcore and a definition for casual so that you know exactly who I'm talking about. The hardcore player are players that play the game regularly for many hours. They often have more skill than a casual player, but not always, and they've more than likely been playing the Crew franchise since before Motorfest launched. They're also generally more competitive in terms of the racing and the performance, and not so focused on playlists and content. The casual player are players that either have limited time to play due to real-life commitments, or they choose to play it in little spurts. Generally, they jump in, play around the time of seasonal updates, and then they fall off shortly after that until something new in the game piques their interest again, like a new car or a new playlist or new content. Because of their limited play, they don't generally possess the skills or knowledge to be competitive in Motorfest's only competitive activities like the Summit and the Grand Races. Both of these player bases is important to the success of Motorfest. They both need to exist, and they both need to like playing the game. But let's talk about the development and the publisher perspective. This is obviously just a guess. I don't have any affiliation with either one of these companies. I don't know exactly what's going on inside the studios, but it's not a completely uneducated guess. Based on what they've done with the game in the first year and a half of live service, they seem to have acquire more players higher on their priority list than make the game better for the hardcore players. And to be honest with you, it's rare that those priorities overlap. So with each of these updates, they're focusing on adding new playlists, new cars to attract the casual player. And in the same breath, they're missing the mark with their hardcore players. A perfect example of this is an issue that came up this weekend. If you're unaware, in Season 6, IVT introduced a couple new modifiers for the Grand Races, one of which is called Main Stage, and it limits the car choices to only Main Stage vehicles for that Grand Race rotation. In addition to that modifier, they also introduced a new all-day modifier event that happens every single Saturday for 24 hours. During those events, the chosen modifier for that week is active for the duration of the event, and this weekend was the Main Stage modifier, which meant that the car selection for Grand Races was limited to a handful of British-specific AGP, rally, and racing cars. Although I'm not a fan of limiting car choice in Grand Races, I'm not arguing for or against this modifier with this video, because I don't want to derail the video and make it an argument over whether it's good or not. The actual issue is the fact that for 24 hours, every single Grand Race you could play in featured only rally, racing, and AGP. The repetitiveness of this is just unreal, and the irony is crazy. The inspiration for creating that modifier in the first place was to switch up the variety of cars being used in Grand Races because the casual community was tired of seeing the same car on the podium, and yet 2 out of the 3 categories, the actual meta cars are British, so people could use them anyways. But that's sort of besides the main point I want to make, which is that it's not even about the cars. The players who want to win Grand Races are going to use the fastest cars available, no matter how big or small the selection is. It's about the lack of variety in racing due to only having 3 classes for the entire day. The modifier was introduced because the casual community was complaining about the hardcore community using meta cars in every grand race, and yet the casual community aren't the ones playing the grand races every day for hours on ends. The hardcore are. So now a modifier that is designed with casual players in mind is forced on the hardcore community in the activity that they play the most for the entire day. Again, it's about the lack of variety in the racing, not the limited car selection. And it's about IVT and Ubisoft once again prioritizing the casual players over the hardcore. If the hardcore players are being considered, this modifier wouldn't have been introduced in the first place, let alone have it be active for 24 hours and have it limited to 3 specific classes. The reality is the hardcore players are the ones playing grand races for hours on end. Nobody wants to play the same exact 3 classes for that many hours. Casual players are casual for a reason. They go in, they have fun for a couple of races, and they jump out. The fact that this is active for an entire day does not affect them like it does the hardcore. So what are the actual effects? The results of this is the division amongst these two communities, and it's not really healthy for the game at all. By catering to the casual player base, they are pushing away the players who play the game the most. From my perspective, it should be completely the other way around. They should be catering to the players who play the game the most while attempting to make it as easy as possible for a casual player to jump in and have a good time. And from my perspective, there's only one real way to do that in this scenario. It's ranked grand races. If ranked grand races were an option, the hardcore players who are looking to compete would be in a ranked mode, and the casual player base who's not really interested in being competitive would queue up for non-ranked grand races. If you want to have modified events for the non-ranked grand races that restrict cars all day, you do it. If you want to have them just restricted to one single car, one single vehicle class, or if you want to have wacky modifiers like increased slipstream or unlimited nitro or cars that fly, I don't really care. You can put that in the fun casual mode, and a ranked grand race queue can still exist for people who want to race and sweat super hard. Basically, the game would contain spaces where sweat can collect and where casual players can jump in and have a good time. IVT, I don't want to take anything away from casual players. The game should be welcoming and interesting for players who don't necessarily play the game all the time. But the lack of consideration for hardcore players has to be addressed in future updates. This game cannot continue the way it is and still keep the player base that it has. This game is going to have a revolving door of players just coming in, finding what they like, and then leaving. Coming in, not liking something, and leaving. Everybody is going to just rotate. The hardcore audience is eventually going to be phased out, and you'll have nothing more than just a casual audience that shows up once every 3 months to see what the seasonal update is, once a month to see what the new summit car is, and possibly once every year to see if you've added any map. It's definitely not healthy for the game, and it's definitely not a game that interests me outside of making content for it. And I can tell you, I'm definitely not alone. I really hope that you guys consider what the effects are of every single feature that gets added to the game and try to balance it a little bit more between the casual and hardcore player bases. Those player bases generally don't want the same things, so I feel like it's only fair to balance it as best you possibly can with the features that you're adding so that the player base can actually grow instead of being a revolving door of the same number of people. You want to try to keep those hardcore players while adding more players to the base. Anyways, I appreciate anyone who got to the end of this video. I know it was a little bit ranty, and to be honest with you, my mind is all over the place with this because there are so many other things that I want to talk about. So if you guys are really interested in this topic and you're interested in Motorfest succeeding as a game, please come by the podcast this week. We're going to have a special guest. We're going to talk about all the things that this community is divided on, and we're going to try to bridge a little bit of that gap between the hardcore and the casual. I don't think we need to keep these communities divided anymore. We definitely need to come together and make this game as fun as possible, because at the end of the day, that's really what gaming is all about. It's about having fun. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate it. I will catch you on the next one. Trigger out.